one of the problems with weight loss goals is they look at the goal, they look at the weight where they want to get to. They're looking down the road and saying, this is where I want to get. And so I need to cut calories in order to get there. So there are two variables that come into play when it comes to losing weight. And I've already said this, and I'll state it again just to be clear. It's a matter of shrinking fat cells. That's what happens when someone's losing fat mass. It's not that you're losing fat cells. Indeed, you don't want to. That's a topic for another time. But liposuction is a perfect example where you are losing fat mass, and yet no health marker gets better. None. Even though you've lost, you could go in and suck out fat cells, and you'd say, I lost 20 pounds of pure fat. I'm now going to go to my doctor and get my blood test, and I'm going to be so much healthier. And yet nothing is different. If they were diabetic, they're just as diabetic. So if someone's looking at their New Year's goals, and when I spoke with your brother, it was an echo of this conversation in a way. I said, all right, you need to shrink your fat cells. Most people only look at the calorie control. The problem with calorie control is that we've seen what it looks like when you only focus on calorie deprivation. And that is, in a word, hunger. And there was this, within the US, there's been this game show over the years called The Greatest Loser. These people, one, lose a fantastic amount of weight, and yet you never see them again because they gain it all back. So if your weight loss strategy is based on cutting calories without addressing insulin, which is the other of the two variables, then you're going to be hungry. Dr. David Ludwig at Harvard, a friend and colleague and collaborator, he published a report looking at the same kind of dynamic that I outlined a moment ago, two isocaloric or equal calorie meals. And he found that when they ate the meal that spiked insulin, I think he called it total energy availability. So they measured every calorie molecule in the blood. So ketones, BHB, they measured lactate, they measured fats, they measured glucose. And they found that with the insulin spiking meal, the total energy availability went down.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so in other words, with the increase in insulin, as I noted a moment ago, insulin is so determined to store energy that it is directing calories to go from the blood to be stored in tissues like fat or in the liver.
To make you fat.
Yeah, indeed it would. But the problem is the brain doesn't have that storage capacity. You could have big fat cells with lots of energy. You could have a liver with tons of fat and glycogen, which is a stored form of glucose, ready to go. But the brain doesn't have a big storage reservoir, and yet it has a high metabolic rate. And so the brain is constantly relying on the energy in the blood that it can use, especially glucose and ketones, the two primary fuels for the brain. And so when you spike insulin, you lower your glucose and you stop your liver from making ketones. So the two main brain fuels have gone down.
Which is why you get brain fog.
It would certainly lead to some mild cognitive impairment, but it would also drive hunger. And so another group found that if you ate an isocaloric breakfast, one low carb, one high carb, the group that was on the high carb breakfast was much hungrier much sooner. And so this...
Okay, so let me just...
Yeah.
The way I understand that is because I've had a meal that's high in sugar, let's say, or carbs.
Yep.
Insulin has come out. It's grabbed all of the energy from my blood.
Yep, that you just ate.
That I just ate. It's stored it all away. And because my brain is getting its energy from the blood as well, my brain is being energy deprived in some way.
Yeah.
And so my brain is going... Within an hour or two, you are hungry.
Yes, even though your fat cells might be bigger than they've ever been. So that's the sort of disconnect that you end up having when you're spiking insulin so frequently. You may have hundreds of thousands or even millions of calories stored on your body, in your fat cells primarily. And yet the brain is saying, I'm hungry. We shouldn't be hungry. We have so much energy that we can use, but only if we can access it. And this is where ketones come in. I hate to change the topic, but if a person has fat and they can burn that fat, then they're making ketones, and ketones are the brain's preferred fuel. Let's just state that with an exclamation mark. And so if the brain is getting ketones, or even if it has access to plenty of glucose, it senses, hey, there's no energy deprivation, we're fine, we don't need to eat. And that's what these studies find. And so back to the conversation with your brother, rather than focusing on calorie number, focus on the other variable, which is insulin. Because if you decide that you're going to start your fat cell shrinking journey, so with the first step, you could say, well, my first step is going to be cutting calories. But if you haven't addressed your high insulin, which you have to have if you've gained weight, it is impossible. In fact, this is worth a tangent for just a moment, because I can state this so emphatically. You could have all the hormones in the human body and tens of thousands of calories coming in every day, and if you simply remove one single hormone, it is impossible for that person to get fat. Totally and completely impossible. Now, I am a scientist enough that I like to avoid hyperbolic language. I don't want to state anything in the extreme, and yet in this case, I actually can. I can revel in all of the power of this declaration, which is you simply wipe out a person's insulin, it is completely impossible for them to get fat. In fact, this phenomenon is so real and so learned, if not already known, that you have people with type 1 diabetes. Imagine the temptation. Let's say you're a young woman who faces more pressure than her young men counterparts. She just gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and she has become used to eating whatever she wants and being very, very skinny. That is one of the cardinal signs of type 1 diabetes. The person is just losing weight. In fact, the ancients thought that as they were making so much urine, because another feature of type 1 diabetes in an untreated state is they urinate a lot. That's what the word diabetes means. It means polyuria, or a lot of urine formation. They thought that their flesh, their fat, their substance was turning into liquid and excreting from their bodies. And so the person, imagine this young woman, she's say 13 years old, she is super, super skinny, which she likes because there's such a pressure to be skinny. And she can also at the same time eat whatever she wants. And then, but of course she feels miserable, and indeed it will kill her. So she gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and she's put on insulin therapy, and two things happen. She starts eating less and getting fat. In fact, people will gain so much weight that if they're in the hospital for a few days, they can't leave the hospital with the same clothes they came in. That's not to say they're leaving and they're obese, but they can have easily gained 10 pounds, 15 pounds of fat. So this phenomenon is known, and you have people with type 1 diabetes who abuse that fact and will deliberately underdose their insulin so they can eat whatever they want. They could go to a Thanksgiving or a Christmas dinner and indulge in all the sweets and just simply underdose their insulin and be as skinny as they want to be. Now, there's disastrous metabolic consequences, but it's just a testament to the power of insulin. So to finally answer the question, my advice when I was speaking with your brother and anyone listening, don't have your first step on your fat cell shrinking journey be low calorie, because you will find that in short order, hunger will win. And so you'll be right back where you started. Let your first step be, I'm going to lower my insulin, because as I lower my insulin, I don't have to worry about hunger, first of all, because if you're just focusing on lowering insulin, you can tell the person, and indeed I am, eat as much protein and fat as you want, because they have little to no effect on your insulin. So anytime you're hungry, eat something with protein and fat. And then if you're not hungry, don't eat. But anytime you're hungry, you don't have to, it's not deprivation, it's not hunger, but the low calorie approach is hunger. You're going to be hungry. So lower your insulin by controlling your carbohydrates, and basically whole fruits and vegetables, enjoy them. And this is part of the conversation I had with your brother.
And he called you and told you that he had positive results following watching this conversation and following your advice.
Yeah, I think he said he'd effortlessly lost 15 or so pounds, just without even really worrying about it, because you're not having that gnawing hunger.
Yeah, he didn't tell me he was reaching out to you. So I actually only found out that he had spoken to you when he messaged me one day on WhatsApp and was like, I've been chatting to Dr. Benjamin Bikman. And I was like, how did you get his email? How did you get his phone number? So he must have reached out to you.
He knows people.
Okay, right. Okay. He found a way.
Yeah,
okay.
He knows people.
No, but he looks radically different, I have to say. He's dropped a ton of weight and looks fantastic.
Well, he was already handsome, so I can only imagine what he looks like now.
That's the genetic component. But when I look back at the conversation we had, the top comment on our previous conversation is someone saying, I was morbidly obese 68 days ago. I was 280 pounds and pre-diabetic. In these 68 days, I cut out sugar and flour entirely, and I reduced my calories to about 1,800 a day. And I'm pleased to know that my high protein, high fat, low carb diet is the right path, and my blood sugar is now normal.
Yeah, remarkable. I don't mean to ever come across as saying that there's only one way to lose weight. And that anyone listening who is interested in weight loss would say, well, gosh, it looks like I have to eat a lot of meat and eggs. And yet you don't. As much as I am a defender of that view, I wouldn't want someone to think there is only one way to lose weight, because we could both think of people who adopted a purely plant-based diet and lost weight. Now, I have some significant concerns with that diet long term, but even still, they could say, well, I'm eating 100% carbohydrates essentially, and I've lost weight. I'm not saying calories don't matter. They do. But it also makes it a hard long-term strategy. And so if someone can lower their insulin, I'd alluded to a metabolic advantage, and I'll just revisit that briefly. I'd mentioned already one of these things, which is when insulin is down, the metabolic rate goes up. And my lab published a report finding that part of that is through the production of ketones, that when ketones move through the bloodstream and come to our fat cells, they will increase our metabolic rate in our fat tissue by 3 times. And we did this in humans. We studied fat cells in a petri dish, we studied fat tissue from animal models, and then we studied fat tissue from humans, where we actually were pulling biopsies of belly fat from people that were in ketosis or not. And when they were in ketosis, their metabolic rate in their fat tissue was 3 times higher than when they weren't, than the group that was not in ketosis. So this suggests that there's an advantage here that comes from lowering insulin. So as insulin comes down, the person will find that they're just burning weight more easily. And then one other part of that is when you're making ketones, every ketone has a caloric value roughly similar to that of glucose. And so what happens now in ketosis, or when ketones are up, you start wasting those ketones from your body. That you're breathing ketones out or you're urinating ketones out, and those are calories that are just coming from your body that would have had to be burned through exercise or stored in fat tissue. And yet in a low insulin state, that is so antithetical to fat storage that the body just starts literally wasting energy. So every breath they're taking out, when they're breathing out ketones, those are calories just coming out of their body.